Chapter 1. The Invitation to Marwood Manor. Hercule Poirot reclined in his favourite armchair at Whitehaven Mansions, sipping a delicate cup of Darjeeling when the summons arrived. The envelope was embossed with an ornate crest, a chess knight rearing on its haunches, and bore the unmistakable handwriting of one Lord Edmund Marwood. Poirot's little grey cells stirred. "Mon ami," he murmured to Captain Hastings, who was idly thumbing through the morning paper. "It appears dentro de Audiobook, I'm invited to assist with a most curious family matter." Hastings looked up, interest piqued. "Marwood Manor? I recall tales of their exquisite library, and more notably, Lord Marwood's obsession with chess clocks. Why would they need you?" Poirot placed his cup on the dainty saucer with meticulous care. "That, Hastings, is precisely the mystery. The note is brief. My dear Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you. I entreat your presence at Marwood Manor this Friday evening. A family heirloom, a chess clock dating from the Napoleonic era, has been found tampered with, and unsettling accidents have ensued. Pray, lend me your insight." No signature beyond the crest. Hastings frowned. "Accidents? At a country house? Sounds like melodrama." "A plausible underestimate, Hastings," Poirot replied with a small, knowing smile. "But let us see the handwriting." He produced the folded note. Hastings leaned in, squinting. "It's very elegant," Hastings observed. "Sloping, but firm. Whoever wrote it is accustomed to authority." "Indeed," Poirot agreed. "One might even venture to say, privileged." That afternoon, Poirot and Hastings journeyed by train to Marwood Station, where a liveried footman awaited. The carriage ride through rolling fields brought them to the oak gates of Marwood Manor, a grand Georgian edifice swathed in ivy. Within, its entrance hall, lit by a massive crystal chandelier, Lord Edmund Marwood himself appeared, a tall, gaunt man with steel-grey hair and hawk-like eyes. "Mon Dieu, Monsieur Poirot, you honoured me by coming so promptly," he exclaimed, extending a slender hand. "Please, follow me to the library." The library was a sanctum of polished mahogany and leather-bound volumes. At its centre stood a heavy oak table, upon which sat the chess clock, brass-cased with 2 white dials and finely wrought filigree. A crimson velvet cloth had been draped over one side, half concealing the mechanism. "Examine it," Lord Marwood urged. "Yesterday, my nephew Charles wound the clock, something he does daily. When the clock struck its 6th chime, the spring snapped with a sound like a pistol shot. Charles leapt back and injured his shoulder. Then, this morning, my sister-in-law, Lady Viola, found the hour hand reversed, pointing to an impossible hour, and collapsed, claiming she saw ghostly figures in the glass." Poirot bent over the clock, his brow furrowed. He ran a fingertip along the minute hand, felt the cool metal. "Remarkable workmanship," he observed. "But note here, a faint scratch along the rim, as though the case has been forced." He tapped lightly. The clock gave a hollow echo. Lord Marwood stiffened. "Forced? But no one has touched it since my nephew." "Ah, but perhaps someone did," Poirot said softly, "or wished you to believe so. You say the family is close-knit." "They are," Lord Marwood admitted, "yet tensions have grown of late over inheritance matters. Precisely the fertile ground for murmurings of revenge and old grievances, Poirot murmured, straightening. "I shall need to speak with each family member in turn. Your nephew Charles, Lady Viola, and the household staff." As candles were lit against the gathering dusk, Poirot felt the familiar thrill of the chase. The brass clock's dual faces reflected in his keen dark eyes. Somewhere within these walls lay a secret, and behind the ticking of that clock a subtle hand was at work. Poirot's lips curved into a slight smile. "My dear Hastings," he whispered, "the game is afoot." Chapter 2. Shadows and Suspicions. That evening, the family and household staff assembled in the dining room of Marwood Manor. The long mahogany table was laid with silver candlesticks and crystalline glassware, the atmosphere at once ceremonious and tense. Poirot took his seat between Lady Viola and the housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, while Hastings faced the dour figure of Charles Marwood. Lord Edmund presided at the head, his gaunt profile illuminated by flickering candlelight. A servant poured the first course, consommé, its delicate aroma mingling with the soft strains of a distant piano. Conversation was polite but guarded. Charles, trimmed and handsome, spoke of London society. Lady Viola, her pale features framed by sable fur, offered polite nods, but seemed preoccupied. Mrs. Pemberton hovered, ready to refill glasses, while the butler, Mr. Jacobs, stood nearly motionless behind Lord Edmund's chair. Poirot observed with interest. He noticed that Lady Viola's gloves lay beside her plate, fingertips stained faintly yellow. "Mademoiselle," he inquired, "may I ask if you wore these gloves while handling any objects this afternoon?" Lady Viola's eyes flickered. I trimmed the lilies in the conservatory. I sometimes wear gloves to protect my skin from the sap." Poirot inclined his head. "Sap can leave stains, oui. Were your lilies in any way unusual today?" "Unusual?" she echoed. "There is a delicate vine, known as the moon's embrace, that exudes a sap strangely adhesive." Poirot paused, allowing the words to sink in. Lady Viola's lips tightened. Charles cleared his throat. "I'm afraid I know nothing of horticulture, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "No? Yet you have spent considerable time beside the chess clock this week, have you not? Winding it each morning at precisely 9 o'clock. Charles glanced nervously at the clock, visible through the open double doors leading to the library. "I only attend to my duties, monsieur. I have no desire to tamper with family heirlooms." "And yet," Poirot said softly, "duties can be burdensome, and burdens can lead to unfortunate choices." Dinner proceeded, a roast pheasant, followed by asparagus with hollandaise, each course consumed with polite restraint. Poirot listened as Lord Edmund spoke of the estate's finances, mentioning that debts had mounted since his son, Lady Viola's husband, passed away 2 years prior. "The trust was to secure my grandchildren's future," Lord Edmund said, voice tight. "Now everything is in question." A ripple of discomfort passed through the table. Lady Viola's gloved hands clenched, and Poirot noted one glove bore a tiny tear at the thumb. Mrs. Pemberton exchanged a glance with Mr. Jacobs. Dessert arrived, strawberries and cream, powdered with sugar like fresh snow. Hastings commented on the sweetness. Lady Viola touched her sleeve to blot the cream, leaving a smudge. Poirot watched the smear, then fixed his gaze on Mr. Jacobs, whose shoes gleamed too brightly, as though freshly polished in haste. "Jacobs," Poirot said, "you have served the Marwoods faithfully for many years." The butler inclined. "For 18 years, monsieur." 18, Poirot mused. A long time to harbour either loyalty or resentment. "Tell me, have you ever found anything misplaced?" Mr. Jacobs hesitated, then bowed his head. "Miss Emily's sewing reagents once vanished. I later found them in the linen cupboard, but I could not say why Miss Emily would store them there." "Miss Emily?" Poirot called softly. The maid, a small, fleck-haired young woman, blushed as all eyes turned to her. "It was childish, monsieur," Emily stammered. "I misplaced my thimble and borrowed one from Mrs. Pemberton's sewing basket without asking. When I returned it, I thought to keep the others separate." Poirot smiled kindly. "Childish, perhaps, but everyone carries secrets. I thank you, Miss Emily." Dinner concluded with tea and small pastries. Lord Edmund excused himself early, complaining of a headache. The others dispersed. Charles to the billiard-room, Lady Viola to her chamber, Mrs. Pemberton to oversee the clear-up, and Mr. Jacobs to prepare tomorrow's breakfast. Once the dining-room emptied, Poirot rose and approached the double doors. The chess clock stood under a dim lamp, its brass casing gleaming. He crossed to it and gently lifted the crimson cloth. The clock's dials were static, but the hour hand was again reversed, evening shadow adding an uncanny twist. Poirot pressed a secret latch on the side of the case. A hidden panel sprang open to reveal a small compartment, empty save for a single, slender object, a bone-white cylinder, perhaps a fragment of wax. He touched it gingerly. It crumbled to dust. Traces of purple humus clung to the recess, soil from a plant. Behind him, Hastings asked, "Found something, Poirot?" "Mais oui, Hastings. An unexpected subterfuge. This cylinder, wax I believe, once melted, could jam the clock's mechanism suddenly, and the residue, purple humus, suggests the use of the moon's embrace vine." Hastings frowned. But what of it? Poirot turned, eyes alight. "Poisonous, mon ami. The vine's sap can be lethally toxic if introduced to the bloodstream or inhaled as dust. Lady Viola trimmed that very plant today. No wonder her collapse." Hastings whistled softly. So Lady Viola was targeted? Perhaps. But who among us had motive? And why the dramatic snap of the spring, the haunting chimes? Someone wished to frighten, to distract, to injure, or worse. He replaced the panel and recovered the clock. "Tomorrow I shall question each again. For now, Hastings, let us retire. The night is long, and these corridors conceal much." As they climbed the grand staircase, Poirot's mind raced through possibilities. The seeds of suspicion had been sown. By dawn, one among this company would bear the weight of guilt. Chapter 3. Morning interrogations. Dawn light filtered through the tall, mullioned windows of Marwood Manor, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the library's still air. Hercule Poirot d'Abdil descended the grand staircase alone, his steps measured, the little grey cells already abuzz. The library doors stood ajar. He entered to find the chess clock, returned to its place on the velvet-draped table, its hands still frozen in reverse. He smelled leather and old parchment, an aroma he fancied conducive to truth. He seated himself at the table as Captain Hastings joined him, yawning but alert. "Sir Matter, my friend, I shall question each member of the household in turn," Poirot announced, retrieving a slender notebook. "We seek not merely confession, but the slightest tremor of inconsistency." Charles Marwood was first. Poirot found him in the billiard-room, cue in hand, chalk dust speckling his sleeves. "Monsieur Marwood," Poirot began, "you wound the clock each morning at 9. Yet yesterday the spring snapped at precisely 6. Had you noticed anything unusual in the hours before?" Charles rapped the cue lightly against his palm. "Nothing at all. I practised here, played a few frames to clear my mind." He signalled to a scored cue. I must admit I felt uneasy. There were muddy boot prints on the window ledge nearby, as though someone exited hastily. Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Indeed? And you did not think to report this?" Charles hesitated, cheeks flushing. "I assumed it was some stray animal, monsieur. I merely cleared the tracks." Poirot noted the subtle tremor in his voice. Next, Poirot found Lady Viola in the conservatory, tending to her beloved orchids. She wore a morning robe of lavender silk, gloves removed. "Madame," he said gently, "you collapsed after seeing ghostly figures in the clock's reflection. Do you maintain this vision was not a trick of the light?" Lady Viola's violet eyes shimmered. "I saw them, monsieur, pale silhouettes flitting behind the glass." She brushed a stray hair back, revealing the tear in her glove thumb. I extracted a shard of broken crystal from my palm afterward. Poirot bent to inspect a small scuff on the marble floor. "Tell me, when you trimmed the moon's embrace vine, did you notice any residue on your gloves beyond the yellow? Stain?" She shook her head. "Only sap, no powder or dust." Yet Poirot spotted a tiny speck of reddish soil clinging to the hem of her robe, identical in hue to the humus in the clock's hidden compartment. In the kitchens, Mrs. Pemberton hurried about, her apron dusted with flour. Poirot caught her as she arranged fresh buns. "Madame la Gouvernante, this morning's tea tasted oddly metallic. The tin of Darjeeling was wet when I opened it." Her eyes darted. "Perhaps condensation. Our mornings are chilly." Poirot produced a teaspoon bearing faint brown streaks. "This, however, is not mere dampness, but oxidized residue." Tears welled in her eyes. "I only prepare tea as instructed." Poirot's gaze softened, but he noted how her hands quivered when she reached for a napkin. "Where, madame, was the tin kept last night?" She swallowed. "In the pantry, beside the preserves. That is all." He made a note. Poirot then summoned Mr. Jacobs to the billiard-room. The butler's posture was perfect, his expression inscrutable. "Sir, the clock's winding key was missing when I arrived. You produced it from your pocket?" Mr. Jacobs inclined his head. "Found it amongst my watch fobs, monsieur. I do not know how it came there." Poirot caught the flash of a monogram on the key's fob. "CM," the initials of Charles Marwood. Jacobs's gaze flickered. "Curious," Poirot said, tapping the key against the table. "Its teeth are worn unevenly, as though it has forced its way into reluctant locks." Jacobs's lips pressed into a thin line. By mid-morning, Poirot returned to the library, examining the clock with fresh eyes. He opened the secret panel again and collected samples of the crumbled wax and soil into small vials. He measured the gap between the two dials, noted a barely perceptible smear of grease on the minute hand. Hastings peered over his shoulder as Poirot applied a portable magnifier. This smear, Poirot explained, would lubricate the hand just enough to slip past the mechanism. The jam occurs when an abrasive particle, wax, humus, or perhaps a metal sliver, weds itself into the works. He sniffed the residue, and the soil's scent, peaty with a hint of jasmine, belongs to the conservatory's moon's embraced sap. Hastings whistled softly. So Lady Viola's gloves truly bore those traces. May we, Poirot replied, yet she cut herself accidentally in the moonlight, or so she claims. And Charles cleared mud from a window, and Mrs. Pemberton's tea-tin was damp, not by nature, but by design, perhaps to introduce a metallic poison. He paused, tapping his notebook. Each person exhibits a tell, a clue both feigned and real. But which is diversion, and which is the true hand at play? He replaced the samples and closed the panel. Tomorrow we shall test these findings in the laboratory at Marwood Village. Tonight I will dine privately and consider the web of motives, inheritance, impatience, grief-fueled desire for vengeance, or long-standing loyalty turned rancorous. As the clock struck its silent hours, Poirot looked to Hastings. Mon ami, the suspect is among those we questioned, yet the culprit's art lies in concealment. By dawn, I shall unmask the one who plays a deadly game beneath the guise of family duty. Hastings nodded, admiration in his eyes. I await your revelation, Poirot. And with that, the detective retreated to his quarters, mind alight with possibility, the manor corridors echoing his silent footsteps. Chapter 4. The Alchemy of Deceit Late. That afternoon, Poirot summoned Dr. Leonard Fleming, the village chemist, into the oak-panelled laboratory behind Marwood Apothecary. The room was thick with the scent of alcohol and crushed botanicals, shelves lined with glass jars of powders and tinctures. Dr. Fleming, a small man with wire-rimmed spectacles, greeted Poirot with a respectful bow, while Hastings lingered by the doorway. Monsieur Poirot, Dr. Fleming said, I have arranged the samples you sent, the wax fragment, the soil residue, and a swab from the tea-tin. Shall we proceed? Oui, mon ami, Poirot replied, removing his gloves. First, the wax. Pray tell me its composition. Dr. Fleming placed a small shard under a magnifying lens, and then introduced it into a low flame. The wax melted into molten amber, exuding an acrid odour. Unusual, Fleming murmured. This is not pure beeswax. It contains stearic acid and traces of carnauba. Such a mixture would harden slowly, leaving brittle fragments when forced through fine apertures. Poirot nodded. And the residue clinging to the clock's mechanism? Fleming introduced the soil sample to a mild reagent. Under the lens, it turned violet, jasmine-scented peat, Fleming explained. This is soil taken from within the conservatory's moon's embrace pots. But more importantly, he added, peering at a microscopic crystal, I find traces of potassium, cyanide bound to the clay particles. A poison, colourless, odourless, deadly in dust form. Poirot's small moustaches twitched. To be inhaled, perhaps, when the clock was handled. Very ingenious. Hastings exhaled. So the culprit intended to kill or incapacitate whoever wound the clock. Precisely, Poirot said. Next, the tea-tin. Fleming dipped a swab into a clear solution. Here. an elevated mercury content, likely mercuric chloride introduced as a soluble powder. Ingestion would cause severe gastrointestinal distress, but slow enough to evade immediate suspicion. That must explain Lady Viola's pallor when she delivered tea this morning, Hastings said. And the headaches Lord Edmund complained of, Poirot added. Most clever. 2 separate assaults cloaked in seemingly accidental circumstances. Paused, assessing. Now, mon cher Fleming, I am curious. Does such poison require skilled preparation? Dr. Fleming adjusted his spectacles. Mercuric chloride is regulated, yet a household staff member with access to the apothecary or a library might procure it and know its effects. The cyanide-laced soil, however, suggests someone familiar with both chemistry and horticulture. Poirot smiled faintly. So we narrow our suspect to one who moves between laboratory and conservatory. He turned to Hastings. And who among our circle fits both? Hastings thought of Mrs. Pemberton stirring buns in the kitchen, Lady Dorothea, Viola tending orchids, Charles chalking pool cues, and Mr. Jacobs polishing silverware. None possessed obvious chemical expertise, yet one did. Mr. Jacobs often fetched remedies for the late Lady Marwood, and he once assisted the apothecary. Poirot strode back to the library, Hastings at his side. The chess clock sat in silent accusation. Poirot examined the keyhole, and then tapped the lid. "Monsieur Jacobs!" Poirot called, eyes fixed on the butler's empty chair in the hallway. "May I have a word?" Moments later, Mr. Jacobs appeared, immaculate in dress, but his composure seemed taut. Poirot produced the steaming teacup from earlier, now empty. "I have tested this cup," he said, holding it by the handle. "It bore mercuric chloride, yet you served it to Lord Edmund yourself." Jacobs bowed his head. "Monsieur Poirot, my loyalty to the family is unwavering. I would not harm Lord Edmund." Loyalty were, but to which branch of the family? To preserve the trust or to hasten its dissolution? Poirot's gaze bored into him. "You knew that upon Lord Edmund's passing, the estate would fragment, debts crystallized, fortunes lost. Yet you have no personal stake, unless you stood to inherit through Lady Viola." The butler's lips twitched. "Madame la Comtesse never mentioned me in her will." "Perhaps because she expected you to act." Poirot circled him. "You borrowed small amounts of carnauba wax from the apothecary, enough to adulterate the pure wax of the clock. You collected soil from the conservatory late at night, then ground it into powder. And you mislaid the winding key, attaching Charles's initials to Shuai. Suspicion." Jacob straightened. "Monsieur Poirot, these are insinuations." "Yet you cannot deny the evidence," Poirot said, producing the key stamped with CM. "Your fingerprints are faint, but present." A tremor ran through the butler's composure. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a slim packet of violet-streaked earth. "I confess," he whispered, voice cracked. "I fed the clock the wax cylinders and soil. I doctored the tea. It was for the children, to secure their future. But Lord Edmund's negligence forced my hand." Poirot inclined his head. "Tragic error of judgment. You sought to protect, yet instead brought fear and pain." Jacob sank to his knees. "Yes, I would have killed him to prevent greater harm." Hastings looked on in shock. "By heavens, Poirot, You have unmasked him." Poirot closed the packet and handed it to Hastings. "He acted from loyalty twisted by desperation. The law must take its course, but I trust the Marwoods will show mercy." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the chess clock chimed 6 times. Its mechanism restored, its secret revealed. And in the hush that followed, Poirot allowed himself a moment's satisfaction. Once again, order had been restored, and the deadly game brought to an end. Chapter 5. Reckoning and Resolution. The next morning dawned grey and still, as though Marwood Manor itself waited with bated breath. Poirot descended to the library, where Lord Edmund and his family gathered around the chess clock, now repaired and wound. The atmosphere was sombre. Lady Viola's violet eyes were rimmed with tears. Charles's normally poised expression was drawn, and Mrs. Pemberton stood at the door, hands clasped before her. Even the ancient portraits on the walls seemed to regard the assembly with solemn interest. Lord Edmund cleared his throat. "Monsieur Poirot, we owe you our deepest gratitude for unveiling the truth beneath these walls." He gestured toward Poirot's small notebook, which lay open upon the table. "But before we proceed, I must know, why did Mr. Jacobs believe his actions just?" Poirot folded his hands, his expression grave. "Loyalty is a noble quality, but when twisted by despair, it can become destructive. Mr. Jacobs believed that by incapacitating the heir, and then my lord, he could guide the inheritance toward the children, preserving their future against risks he believed your debts posed." He paused, then added softly, "He acted not from malice toward individuals, but from misguided devotion." Lady Viola stepped forward, removing her gloves and holding them to her chest. "Jacobs has been our family's guardian since my birth. I trusted him implicitly." Her voice trembled. Yet his sense of duty, it led him astray. She turned to Charles. "I forgive him, for the children's sake." Charles cleared his throat, voice steady. "Uncle, mother, I too extend forgiveness. Though I admit fear and anger at being targeted, I understand his motives." He gazed at the butler's empty chair. "He meant to protect us." Lord Edmund sighed, placing a kindly hand on his nephew's shoulder. "Then we must protect him, in turn." He nodded to an elder neighbour, Mrs. Ward, who stood near the hearth. "Mrs. Ward, could you see to Mr. Jacobs? I wish to speak with him privately." A hush fell as Mrs. Ward, the vicar's wife, offered a comforting hand to the trembling butler in the hallway. Moments later, Lord Edmund and Mrs. Ward re-entered, escorting a head-bowed and guilt-ridden Mr. Jacobs. His uniform was impeccable, yet the lines of fatigue showed in his eyes. "Jacobs," Lord Edmund began gently, "your service has been a blessing and a trial for this family. Your actions, though misguided, sprang from your devotion. We cannot erase the harm, but we can temper justice with mercy. The county magistrate will decide your fate, but I shall petition for leniency." He turned to Poirot. "I ask your counsel. What would you advise?" Poirot considered, his gaze sweeping the circle of kin. "Monseigneur, the law must take its course. Justice demands accountability. Yet mercy, too, is a facet of justice. Mr. Jacobs's confession and remorse weigh in his favour. I recommend you convey to the magistrate the family's forgiveness and request a reduced sentence, perhaps service rather than imprisonment, so that he might atone constructively. Lord Edmund nodded. So it shall be done. He turned to face Jacobs. My friend, you shall continue to serve this household under closer oversight. Your mistake will not be forgotten, but neither shall your years of faithful counsel. Jacob's shoulders sagged in relief. Thank you, my lord. I swear never again to let fear dictate my actions. With that, the formal reckoning concluded. The family turned to lighter matters. Over luncheon in the sunlit conservatory, the repaired chess clock ticked serenely, its dual faces marking time without threat. Lady Viola arranged fresh blooms. Charles demonstrated a harmless gambit in miniature on a small chessboard, and Mrs. Pemberton poured tea, this time with untarnished serenity. Poirot and Hastings sat at a corner table, observing the restored harmony. Hastings whispered, Mon ami, you have done more than solve a crime. You have restored peace to these troubled hearts. Poirot sipped his tea with satisfaction. Peace, oui, but let us not forget. Each family hides its tensions beneath polite veneers. Yet when adversity strikes, true character emerges. He tapped his moustaches. We cannot shield people from their flaws, but we can offer them the chance to reconcile and move forward. Hastings nodded, then pointed to the clock. And what of the honorary prize for the clock's restoration? A gift from the Marwoods. Poirot smiled. My dear Hastings, the satisfaction of the mind is prize enough. But I confess, a small token, a volume on chess endgames, would delight me. He grinned, especially one bound in fine leather. Later that afternoon, as Poirot and Hastings prepared to depart Marwood Manor, Lady Viola appeared in the hallway. She held a slender, leather-bound book stamped with a gold knight. For you, Monsieur Poirot, with our heartfelt thanks. Inside, an inscription read, To Monsieur Hercule Poirot, whose brilliance preserves both life and legacy. Poirot bowed, placing the gift carefully under his arm. Madame, the honour is mine. Your family's unity is reward enough. He paused, then added, But I shall cherish your gift none the less. As the carriage rolled away, Poirot gazed back at the ivy-clad manor. The chess clock's secret was laid bare, and Marwood Manor could begin anew. He closed his eyes, recalling the delicate balance between loyalty and obsession, and whispered, In the game of life, mes amis, the greatest victory is that of the Ye-ish heart. And with that, Hercule Poirot's silver-tipped cane tapped in time with his thoughts, carrying him onward toward his next adventure. Chapter 6. The Hidden Ledger. The following morning, grey skies pressed against the mullioned windows of Marwood Manor, as though the house itself hesitated to embrace the light. Poirot and Hastings, having enjoyed a quiet breakfast with Lady Viola and Charles, were on the point of taking leave when Poirot paused at the threshold of the library. His keen gaze, ever alert to the faintest irregularity, fell upon the polished oak desk that had once hosted the secreted chess clock. Mon ami, he said softly to Hastings, I believe I left behind my gloves. He retraced his steps, moving with the elegant precision of a dancer. Hastings followed, curious at this sudden return. Poirot's eyes swept the room. The repaired clock stood proudly on its velvet plinth, the morning sunlight glinting off its brass. Yet something or rather someone, had disturbed the neighbouring bookshelf. He approached and ran a fingertip along the spines of the leather-bound volumes. There, between two hefty tomes on estate law, lay a narrow gap. Intrigued, Poirot gently pressed against the shelf. It swung inward on hidden hinges to reveal a slender compartment carved into the wall. Within lay a small leather-bound ledger, its cover stamped with the Marwood crest. Hastings, astonished, exclaimed, "But who would hide a ledger in plain sight?" Poirot slipped the book from its niche and settled at the desk. "Let us examine its contents without delay." He opened the ledger to the first page. Meticulous columns of figures, names, and dates. Accounts of the Marwood Trust spanning the past 5 years. He ran his finger down the entries until a rustle caught his attention. A loose sheet, yellowed at the edges, slipped beneath a ledger page. Extracting it, he unfolded a handwritten memorandum. "Ensure the night never falters at dawn. Fees to Passmore and Gray, 1,000 guineas. Trust integrity hinges on timely moves." Poirot's little grey cells sparked. Passmore and Gray, the solicitor firm employed by Lord Edmund. Hastings peered over his shoulder. "A chess metaphor for legal manoeuvring?" he mused. "Precisely," Poirot said, tapping the paper. "The reference to the night suggests a person of trust. Perhaps Mr. Jacobs must act at a specified hour. But the financial payment implies the complicity of the solicitor or his agent." He held the ledger open to a series of entries. Substantial fees paid to Passmore and Gray, unchecked for months. These payments were authorised by Lord Edmund, but to whom were they disbursed, and for what purpose? Hastings frowned. Could the solicitor himself have orchestrated the clock's sabotage, then enlisted Jacobs as an unwitting pawn? An astute hypothesis. Poirot closed the ledger gently. "We must confirm whether Mr. Passmore or his partner, Mr. Gray, had both motive and opportunity. If the solicitor feared exposure of misallocated funds in the trust, he might resort to intimidation, halting the trust's trustee, Lord Edmund, through fear or incapacitation." Hastings's eyes widened. "But that would require precise knowledge of the clock's secret mechanism and the conservatory's flora." Poirot smiled. "True!" "Which suggests collaboration between Jacobs, who knew of the clock's hidden panel, and an outsider versed in trust matters. Jacobs believed he acted alone to protect the children. In reality, he was a dupe in a larger scheme." He snapped. The ledger shut. "I shall need to confront Mr. Passmore directly." At that moment Lady Viola entered, having sought her morning tea. She paused at the sight of the ledger. "Monsieur Poirot, what have you found?" He looked up, gentle yet firm. "Madame, this ledger contains evidence of substantial and hitherto unexplained payments to your family's solicitors. Coupled with this memorandum, it suggests that someone within Passmore and Gray sought to manipulate the Marwood Trust." Her face paled. "My father's finances already lie in disarray. Were he threatened, if silenced by fear, he might sign documents transferring assets, and the chess clock provided both a weapon and a symbol." Poirot continued. "A delayed mechanism to instill dread, 6 chimes to herald doom. But in truth, the danger flowed from a pen, not a poisoned gear." Lady Viola bit her lip. "My uncle trusted Passmore and Gray implicitly. We shall never forgive such betrayal. Hence our next step," Poirot said. I shall write to Mr. Passmore, requesting immediate audience. Hastings, will you accompany me to his office in Marwood Village?" An hour later, they stood before the modest ivy-clad building marked Passmore and Gray, solicitors. Inside, leather chairs and polished oak contrasted with the dour expressions of Mr. Passmore and his junior partner, Mr. Gray, summoned by an urgent telegram. Poirot greeted them with polite courtesy before unveiling the ledger's evidence. "Gentlemen," he began, laying the memorandum on the table, "the Marwood Trust has financed your firm to the tune of thousands of guineas without clear justification. Moreover, this note, handed to Mr. Jacobs, demonstrates collusion to disrupt Lord Edmund's faculties. Will you explain?" Mr. Passmore paled, his composure unsteady. Mr. Gray swallowed. "Monsieur Poirot, we acknowledge the payments, but they were advanced fees against complex trust litigation." "Yet no litigation was ever brought," Poirot countered, "and the memorandum implies an exchange of 1,000 guineas for a clandestine act. What litigation? Show me your files." They produced a dusty folder. 2 pages of standard correspondence, no suit filed, no case number assigned. The ledger's entries far exceeded legitimate fees. Poirot's eyes glinted. It would seem these funds were misappropriated, perhaps funding Mr. Jacobs' misguided efforts, while the solicitors looked the other way. Mr. Passmore's voice trembled. We sought to secure our fees, but never anticipated this." Poirot inclined his head. "Intent alone, under duress, suffices. You have endangered Lord Edmund and the Marwood family. The authorities will be notified, yet you may redeem yourselves by cooperating fully with the investigation." As Mr. Passmore and Mr. Gray slumped in their chairs, Poirot allowed himself a small smile. The web of deceit, which began in the manor's shadows, now lay exposed in broad daylight, and in the quiet certainty of justice, his silver-tipped cane tapped once more in triumphant rhythm. Chapter 7. The Final Move. The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time Poirot and Hastings returned to Marwood Manor, their minds still occupied by the revelations at Passmore and Gray. The gravel crunched beneath the carriage wheels, and the manor's windows glowed like watchful eyes in the gathering dusk. Inside, the household awaited news. Anxious faces lit by lamplight as servants whispered in the corridors. Poirot paused on the threshold, inhaling the familiar scent of paper and polished wood. "Mon ami," he said to Hastings, "the game nears its conclusion. Tonight we confront the evidence and secure justice for the Marwoods." In the library, Lord Edmund sat beside Lady Viola and Charles, their expressions a mixture of relief and trepidation. Mrs. Pemberton hovered near the mantel, while Emily and Mr. Jacobs lingered at opposite corners, the butler's posture uncharacteristically solemn. Poirot surveyed the assembly with gentle authority. "Lord Edmund," he began, "the solicitor firm Passmore and Gray has admitted to misappropriating trust funds and colluding, whether knowingly or negligently, in the plot to incapacitate you. Tomorrow the county constable will take formal statements and arrange charges, but tonight I wish to ensure the family's well-being." Lady Viola reached for her father's hand. "As long as justice is served, I feel gratitude beyond words." Poirot inclined his head. "Good. Now, there is one final matter. The hidden ledger and memorandum were discovered by chance, and by no design of Mr. Jacobs. Yet the true mastermind sought to avoid exposure. He paused, studying the faces before him. We must confirm that no other conspirators remain within these walls. Charles squared his shoulders. If there are more villains, let them be unmasked. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Then, we shall test the family's trust in one another. He motioned to Emily. Miss Emily, would you bring the chess clock here? The young maid obeyed, carrying the velvet-draped instrument to the table. Poirot removed the cloth with ceremonious care. Hastings leaned forward as the brass gleamed in the lamplight. Observe, Poirot said. I have returned the original, winding key to its slot. But there is another key, smaller, hidden beneath the clock's base. He pressed a secret latch, revealing a second compartment. From it he withdrew a miniature key, tarnished and bent. Lady Viola gasped. What is that? Poirot turned to Mr. Jacobs. You believed yourself the sole participant, yet this key bears a maker's mark matching Charles's cue, ironically bearing his initials. He held it aloft. It was slipped into place only after the initial cylinder sabotage, suggesting a second phase designed to ensure Lord Edmund could never reverse the clock's time. That key would jam the mechanism irreparably, destroying both heirloom and heir. Charles paled. I swear, monsieur, I had not seen this key before tonight. Poirot's gaze shifted to Mrs. Pemberton. Madame la Gouvernante, you supervise the household's linens and cutlery, and often access the library. Could this key have passed through your hands? Her eyes widened in shock. Never. I attend to mundane tasks, monsieur, nothing more. Poirot nodded courteously. Certainly, yet we must consider all possibilities. He turned to Lady Viola. Madam, you oversee the conservatory, and often enter here to select books for leisure. Might you have handled the clock late last night? Lady Viola shook her head. I've been with father in his study. I only passed through here to retrieve my gloves. Emily stepped forward, small yet resolute. Monsieur Poirot, may I speak? All eyes turned to the maid. I saw Mrs. Pemberton in the library after dinner. She was carrying a tray of glasses, yes, but she lingered by the clock. I thought it odd she touched the velvet cloth twice. Pemberton's face drained of colour. Emily, that's preposterous. Poirot held out a hand. Young Emily, thank you. A keen eye is invaluable. Mrs. Pemberton, would you care to explain your presence here? The housekeeper's composure faltered. She glanced at Lord Edmund, then at Lady Viola. I wish to remove the old velvet cloth for laundering. It was stained by wax and soil from cleaning the clock yesterday. Poirot's moustaches quivered. Indeed, and yet the cloth bore no trace of soil nor wax, only a faint smudge. He produced a sample swab from his pocket. This residue, when tested, revealed traces of laudanum. Gasps echoed. Lord Edmund rose. Laudanum! Poisoned opiate! But why? Mrs. Pemberton sank to her knees, tears streaming. I could not bear to see this family torn apart. I loved them like my own. When the first sabotage failed to remove you, Lord Edmund, I took a vial from the apothecary to finish the task silently. Slip the laudanum into your evening brandy. I meant only to induce a coma, so that changes to the will could be enacted by trusted parties. Charles knelt beside her. Mother did not love the solicitor's betrayal, but this, no! He looked to Lady Viola. We must forgive, but she must face judgment. Poirot rose and bowed his head. A sorry truth. Greed and fear manifest in many forms. Two conspiracies, one spurred by trust, betrayals outside, one by devotion twisted, within. He addressed Lord Edmund. You have before you two misguided souls, Mr. Jacobs, who sought to protect, and Mrs. Pemberton, who sought to preserve. It is your decision, mercy or condemnation. Lord Edmund drew a trembling breath. I see now that love, when warped by desperation, can yield terrible deeds. I shall petition for leniency for both, urging the magistrate to consider family, service and treatment rather than prison. Lady Viola wept. Charles embraced his sister. Poirot and Hastings stood aside, content in the resolution. Poirot whispered to Hastings, "The final move has been made." Hastings smiled, relief evident. As midnight approached, the manor settled into a fragile peace. In the quiet, Poirot reflected that even the best of families harbour shadows, but it is only by facing them that true harmony can be restored. And so the Marwoods could look forward, their legacy safeguarded. At last. Chapter 8. Dawn's renewal morning broke over Marwood Manor in a gentle hush, the grey clouds of the previous days giving way to pale sunlight that filtered through dew-laden branches. Lady Viola and Charles stood on the terrace overlooking the rose garden, wrapped in wool shawls against the crisp air. Poirot and Hastings joined them, their breath misting in the cool light. "Madam," Poirot began, "how fares your family?" "This morning?" Lady Viola inhaled deeply, eyes bright. "Father rested well. He awoke with gratitude rather than fear." She held up a small porcelain cup. He insisted on brewing. The first tea himself, to reclaim simple joys. Charles smiled. "And Mrs. Pemberton and Mr. Jacobs are to perform community service at the village infirmary." Father's petition for leniency was granted, provided they receive counselling and oversight. Hastings nodded approvingly. "A fitting solution, justice tempered by compassion." Poirot glanced toward the rose bushes. "And the conservatory?" Viola traced a finger along a fallen petal. "I have replanted the moon's embrace vine in solitary pots, marking each clearly. No more secrets in shadowed corners." She paused, recalling darker hours. "The conservatory feels brighter now. No spectres behind glass." They headed indoors, where Lord Edmund awaited in the library. The walls, once heavy with tension, now felt lighter. Portraits seemed to glance down. With approval, Edmund stood beside the repaired chess clock, its brass gleaming in the morning sun. "Mon cher Poirot," he said, bowing slightly, "your wisdom has done more than unveil conspiracies. You have guided us back to harmony." He gestured to a small table laden with papers. "I have drafted revised bylaws for the trust, codifying transparency and annual third-party audits. No one may tamper with our legacy again." Poirot's moustaches twitched in satisfaction. "Très bien. A solid defence against both avarice and fear." Edmund handed Poirot a sealed envelope. "A final token of our gratitude, these letters of thanks from the villagers. Your kindness in resolving matters gently has touched many." Poirot bowed. The happiness of Marwood is its own reward. Later, as Hastings and Poirot prepared to depart, Lady Viola presented each with a small keepsake. To Hastings, a leather-bound notebook in which to record future adventures. To Poirot, a handcrafted ivory chess knight, its base inscribed with the Marwood crest. "May it always remind you of truth's triumph," Viola said softly. Poirot accepted the knight reverently. "Madame, this is more precious than jewels." He turned to Hastings. "My friend, shall we?" They stepped into the awaiting carriage. As the horses trotted down the carriage drive, Hastings leaned forward. "Before we leave, Poirot, do you ever tire of these games of deception?" Poirot tapped his cane thoughtfully. "On the contrary, Hastings, each case whets my appetite. Yet it is not the game itself, but the restoration of order that delights me most. The reunification of hearts once torn by darkness." He gazed back at the ivy-clad manor fading into morning mist. "Marwood has emerged stronger. Its guardians have learned that vigilance and compassion walk hand in hand." Hastings smiled. "And what of the Ivory Knight?" Poirot cradled the miniature piece. A reminder that in life's grand chessboard, no piece is insignificant. Even the smallest knight can protect a kingdom, provided it moves with integrity. As the carriage turned onto the main road, Marwood Manor receded into the distance, its spires bathed in new light. Poirot closed his eyes, savouring the calm after the storm. Beyond the horizon lay fresh mysteries, waiting for the moment when his little grey cells would again spring to life. And so, with dawn's renewal echoing in their hearts, Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings journeyed onward, ready for whatever challenge lauded the elegance of truth next. Chapter 9. Echoes Beyond Marwood. The coach rattled along the winding country road, early autumn sunlight dappling the hedgerows as Poirot and Hastings journeyed back toward London. A gentle hush settled between them, punctuated only by the clip-clop of hooves and the rhythmic sway of the carriage. Hastings leaned forward, gazing back at the distant silhouette of Marwood Manor. "It's hard to believe so much drama unfolded within those walls," Hastings remarked, folding his hands on his lap. And now the family moves forward in peace." Poirot nodded, eyes half closed in reflection. "Peace, mon ami, is often born of adversity. Yet even after the storm passes, its echoes linger." He tapped his cane thoughtfully. "I too feel a residue of the manor's secrets clinging to my thoughts." Hastings turned, curious. "Do you regret unearthing every concealed truth?" "Regret?" Poirot's moustaches quivered in amusement. "No, Hastings. A mystery half solved is like a symphony left incomplete. One must hear every note to appreciate the harmony." He opened his satchel and retrieved the Ivory Knight Viola had gifted him. He cradled it for a moment, its smooth curves warm against his palm. "This little piece shall remind me that even after one investigation ends, the final chords may still await revelation." They lapsed into silence, each companion lost in his own thoughts. At midday they paused at an inn for luncheon. Mushroom, vol au vents and tender slices of roast beef, washed down with a crisp burgundy. Hastings chatted cheerfully with the innkeeper's daughter, while Poirot examined the night beneath the golden lamplight. "See here, Hastings," he said quietly, passing the piece to his friend. "Notice these faint notches on the knight's base." Hastings peered closely. "Yes, I thought they were scratches." "Scratches," Poirot mused, "or perhaps a coded message. Viola assured me it was handcrafted by her late mother's artisan, who often concealed initials or dates in his work. Yet these marks seem irregular, almost as if someone used the knight to score a surface." Hastings frowned. "You believe someone tampered with the gift?" "Perhaps," Poirot replied. "Or perhaps the artisan's signature went unnoticed, until now. When we reach London, I shall consult a master carver to decipher the marks." They resumed their journey under the broad canopy of elm trees, the sky a pale blue expanse. As evening fell and gas lamps flickered to life, the city's skyline emerged on the horizon. Poirot's face softened at the sight of familiar rooftops. Back at Whitehaven Mansions, the detective settled into his armchair with a steaming cup of tea. Hastings retrieved the ivory knight from Poirot's hand and set it carefully on a low table. Together they examined the carved notches through a jeweller's lens. Indeed, the marks formed a barely perceptible sequence. 17/09/1832. An anniversary, Hastings suggested, or a birth date, Poirot said, closing his eyes. September 17th, 1832. It rings no bell in the Marwood annals, yet it may refer to another event, perhaps the founding of some trust, or the birth of an heir overlooked. Hastings tapped his chin. Could this relate to the codicil we never found in the hidden ledger? Poirot's smile was thoughtful. The codicil. Yes. Remember the ledger's final blank pages? I wondered whether those sheets concealed further entries. This date could point us there. He set down the lens. Monsieur Passmore may possess archives predating our ledger, in which this date figures prominently. Hastings nodded. Another journey, then. May we? Poirot affirmed, hands clasped. For a detective, every case leaves breadcrumbs leading onward. Even as one chapter closes, the next begins quietly beneath the surface. Hastings rose to fetch his coat. Then let us prepare. After all, the game never truly ends. Poirot tapped the ivory knight in gentle salute. Exactly, Hastings. The little grey cells remain ever vigilant. And so, as night deepened over London, Poirot and his steadfast companion embarked on the promise of a new puzzle, forever guided by the smallest knight on a grand chessboard of secrets. Chapter 10. The Codicil of Shadows Morning. Light filtered through the tall windows of Passmore and Gray's archival room, casting slender beams across rows of mahogany shelves. Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings stood before a locked cabinet, its brass escutcheon engraved with the firm's founding date, 1874. Hastings peered over Poirot's shoulder as the solicitor, Mr. Passmore, produced an old key, still tarnished, from decades of handling. Here, Monsieur Poirot, Passmore said, voice subdued yet respectful. These are our original archives. No one has consulted them since I inherited the practice from my father. He inserted the key and turned it with a click. The cabinet door swung open, revealing ledgers bound in faded leather, some so thick their spines threatened to split. Poirot's moustaches quivered in anticipation. Nous y sommes, Hastings. The date on Viola's ivory knight, 17th September 1832, must correspond to an entry here. He withdrew a delicate magnifying lens from his vest pocket and nodded to Mr. Passmore. Might you assist me in locating files around that period? Perhaps correspondences or codicils related to trusts held by the Marwood family. Passmore led them through the aisles to a lower shelf. He pulled down volume 7, marked Marwood Estate, 1825-1860. Poirot cradled it reverently and opened to the back, where unnumbered leaves protruded slightly. He leafed through carefully until he reached a half-torn page, headed with the date, September 17th, 1832. Hastings leaned close. There it is, Poirot. An amendment to Lord Algernon Marwood's will. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he read aloud. By this codicil, I, Algernon Marwood of Marwood Manor, do bequeath 1/10 of my estate, specifically the lands known as Greycroft and the adjacent Manor Hearth, to my daughter Anne Marwood, born on this day, 17th September 1832, to ensure provision outside the primary male succession. Poirot closed the volume and turned to Mr. Passmore. This codicil was never enacted. The original will superseded it without reference. Thus, Anne's lineage, now lost to history, remains unprovided for. He tapped the page. By omitting this codicil from the family records, an entire branch of the Marwoods was effectively erased. Their descendants would have legitimate claim to Greycroft lands, and perhaps a stake in the trust we revised. A hush fell. Hastings exhaled. So, the night's fateful date pointed us to the forgotten daughter. Poirot nodded. Miss Oui. Viola's mother, the late Lady Marwood, must have known. Perhaps she encoded the date in her artisan's work as a silent testament to Anne's memory. Mr. Passmore sank into a leather chair. I cannot believe neither my father nor I discovered this. Had it been included, the trust distribution might have differed entirely. He ran a hand through his hair. We shall need to inform Lord Edmund's lawyers at once. Poirot closed the ledger gently. Not yet, monsieur. First, we must ascertain whether any living descendants of Anne Marwood remain. If so, they must be notified before any legal steps proceed. He glanced at Hastings. We must trace her. Line. Hastings nodded. I recall mention of a remote village, Harlingford, where Anne was said to have married a solicitor's clerk, one Jonathan Kirkwood. Their children likely carried the Kirkwood name. He produced his notebook. I can dispatch a telegram to the parish register in Harlingford. Poirot smiled. Excellent. Meanwhile, I will confer with Lord Edmund. The revelation of this codicil, hidden for nearly a century, will change the Marwood legacy forever. He tucked the volume under his arm and turned to Hastings. Shall we? That afternoon, in Whitehaven Mansions, Poirot briefed Lord Edmund and Lady Viola in the drawing-room, the ivory knight placed between them on a satin cushion. Hastings paced while Poirot explained the codicil's contents. Edmund's face shifted, through surprise, disbelief, and finally solemn resolve. Anne was my great-great-aunt, Edmund murmured. I knew she existed, but believed her line extinct. He touched the ivory knight gently. This gift has done more than honour my mother's memory. It has restored a missing part of my family's history. Lady Viola's eyes sparkled. Imagine a living relation, someone who can inherit alongside Charles and me. She looked at Poirot. What do we do now? Poirot inclined his head. We await confirmation of her descendants. Should they wish to assert their claim, we shall welcome them. The trust's bylaws can be adjusted to include rightful heirs." He paused, voice soft but firm. "Justice should correct the past, not repeat its errors." That evening, Hastings returned with a telegram bearing news from Harlingford. Poirot opened it with precise fingers. Register consulted. One Anne Kirkwood, born 1855, married Thomas Bellamy. 3 living descendants reside in Devonshire. 2 daughters, Miss Clara Bellamy, age 42, and Miss Maud Bellamy, age 39. Hastings read aloud, eyes wide. 2 living Marwood heirs. Poirot allowed a rare smile. "The final move, Hastings. Soon the Marwood Trust will reflect its founder's true intentions." He tapped the ivory knight thoughtfully. "And so, the board is set. Tomorrow we shall journey to Devonshire and introduce ourselves to the Bellamy sisters, distant kin restored by a handwritten date and an ivory knight's silent whisper." As moonlight shimmered on the Thames outside, Hercule Poirot prepared for yet another journey, one that would reunite a fractured dynasty and ensure that the Marwood legacy, at long last, stood complete. Chapter 11. The Bellamy Revelation. Early morning mist curled along the lanes of Devonshire as Poirot and Hastings disembarked from the hired carriage at the modest stone cottage marked Bellamy in tidy script. The garden was wild with lupines and foxgloves, their blooms nodding beneath a sky the colour of pearl. Poirot paused at the gate, adjusting his immaculate grey suit and polishing his moustaches with a subtle finger. Hastings, carrying the ivory knight in its velvet-lined box, gave a reassuring nod. "Remember, Hastings," Poirot murmured, "we tread lightly. These ladies know nothing of their heritage, yet soon they shall discover they are heirs to Marwood's ancient legacy." They crossed the gravel path and knocked twice upon the heavy oak door. Moments later, it opened to reveal a slender woman in her early 40s, hair the colour of ripened wheat, eyes the hue of summer skies. She curtsied gracefully. "Good morning, gentlemen. I am Clara Bellamy." Behind her, in the parlour, stood a younger woman, her sister, Maud, framed by a window through which soft light fell upon her thoughtful face. Poirot inclined himself. "Madame, thank you for granting us this audience. I am Hercule Poirot, and this is my friend Captain Hastings. We come on behalf of Lord Edmund Marwood to convey unexpected news." He produced the sealed copy of Algernon Marwood's codicil and the ivory knight's date inscription. Clara's brow furrowed, curiosity and apprehension mingling. Hastings gently laid the ivory knight on the low tea-table between them. "We believe you may be the rightful heirs named in this document," he explained. "Your great-great-grandmother, Anne Kirkwood, née Marwood, born 17 September 1832, was bequeathed a portion of the Marwood estate." Maud exchanged a glance with Clara. "My grandmother often spoke of distant relatives, but I never knew specifics." She reached out to trace the gilded knight's contours. This is ours?" Poirot poured tea with exquisite care. "Legally, yes, should you choose to accept." The codicil remained unfiled for nearly a century, but now it stands revealed. Lord Edmund has amended the trust so that all rightful heirs share in the estate's benefits. He paused, eyes luminous. "Your heritage awaits your blessing." Clara's hand trembled as she lifted the document. I hardly know what to say." She read the opening lines aloud, her voice catching. "I do bequeath 1/10 of my estate to my daughter, Anne Marwood." She looked up, tears glistening. "I feel as though I have just met a grandmother I never knew." Maud rose and embraced her sister. "Imagine what this means for our family. Land to preserve, financial security, and a piece of history restored." She turned to Poirot. "How did you discover this?" Poirot offered a serene smile. "An ivory knight, inscribed by Lady Viola's artisan, bore the date, an invitation to uncover the codicil. My little grey cells followed the trail from Marwood Manor to Passmore and Grey's archives, and thence to your door." Clara wiped a tear. "You have given us more than an inheritance. You have given us family." She looked to Maud. "Shall we visit the manor and meet Lord Edmund?" Maud nodded. "Yes, for too long our roots lay hidden in Devonshire's dales. It is time we walked the halls of our ancestors." "That would delight Lord Edmund," Poirot said, rising. "He intends to welcome you at Marwood Manor this very week, to formalise the amendment and celebrate your arrival. Over the next hour, they discussed travel plans, a carriage from Marwood Station, accommodations in the East Wing, and a lunch to be prepared by Lady Viola herself." The sisters listened eagerly, their earlier reserve transforming into eager anticipation. Poirot and Hastings took their leave. Clara pressed her hands together. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, thank you for the courage and courtesy with which you delivered this news. We shall never forget your skill and kindness." Poirot bowed, lifting his hat. "Madame, it has been my honour. May your time at Marwood bring you joy and a sense of belonging." He glanced at the ivory knight laid on the tea-table. "I leave this with you as a symbol of our shared journey." Hastings opened the door. "Come, Poirot, the road awaits, and there are preparations to be made in Yorkshire." He smiled. "Another successful case, n'est-ce pas?" Poirot tucked his cane under one arm and adjusted his gloves. "May we, Hastings? Yet our greatest satisfaction lies in witnessing the healing of old wounds. And now the Marwood family stands complete once more." As they strode down the cottage path, the Devonshire sun emerged from behind wisps of cloud, illuminating the Bellamy sisters at the window. 2 new branches on a storied family tree, ready to flourish at Marwood Manor. Chapter 12. Homecoming at Marwood Manor. A crisp autumn morning greeted the Bellamy sisters as their carriage rolled beneath the ivy-clad arch of Marwood Manor's entrance. Clara and Maud Bellamy, clad in travelling coats of soft camel wool, exchanged excited glances as the great doors swung wide. Lady Viola stood on the steps, her smile warm and genuine, while Charles waited behind her, tipping his hat in deference. "Welcome! Home!" Lady Viola cried, stepping forward to embrace them both. "Marwood has looked forward to this day for many years." Clara felt her heart swell. "Thank you, Lady Viola. It's as if we step into a dream." Maud nodded, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "We hardly know where to begin." Charles offered his arm to Clara, leading her up the flagstone steps. "If you will allow me, I'll show you to your chambers in the East Wing. You'll find them prepared as we discussed. Fresh roses on your pillows and views of the rose garden." Inside the great hall, the air was redolent of carved oak and polished marble. Portraits of long-gone Marwoods gaze down. They're silent. Approval tangible. Poirot and Hastings are waited by the central hearth, the detective's moustaches quivering in anticipation. "Mesdemoiselles," Poirot said in his most courtly tone, booing, "I congratulate you on your return to your ancestral home." He offered the ivory knight to Clara, who took it reverently. "A symbol of unity. May it always remind you of this day." Clara traced the knight's curve. "It's beautiful, monsieur. I shall treasure it." Maud accepted a matching token and placed it carefully inside her reticule. Hastings grinned. "Now that the formal introductions are done, may I offer you tea in the library? The staff have prepared a small reception before luncheon." The two sisters exchanged delighted looks and followed Hastings down the grand corridor, their skirts whispering across the polished floors. Lady Viola and Charles fell into step behind, with Poirot bringing up the rear. The library reception was intimate, delicate finger sandwiches, petits fours sprinkled with autumn leaves in sugar, and steaming cups of Earl Grey. Mrs. Pemberton moved among the guests with quiet dignity, and Mr. Jacobs stood by the windows, his head bowed but his eyes bright with goodwill. Maud approached Mrs. Pemberton. "I hope you will forgive any discomfort caused." The housekeeper bowed. "Madam, my deepest regret is that I bore my own pain in silence." "Your forgiveness is a greater gift than you know." Clara raised her teacup to Mr. Jacobs. "And I owe you my thanks for safeguarding the manor for Charles and me. Your loyalty, mistaken though it was, came from love." Jacob's lips trembled as he set aside his teacup. "I only wish to serve this house correctly now." Poirot watched these reconciliations with satisfaction. He tapped his cane gently. "Messieurs et mesdames, let us ascend to the dining-room for luncheon. There is much to celebrate." In the grand dining hall, long tables were laden with pheasant, terrine, autumn root vegetables glazed with honey, and a tureen of rich parsnip soup. Above, crystal chandeliers sparkled as sunlight filtered through stained glass windows. Charles rose to propose a toast. To family, found, renewed, and made whole. Glasses clinked in a harmonious chorus. After luncheon, Lady Viola led her sisters on a private tour of the estate. They wandered among the ancient oaks of Greycroft, paused at the hidden glade where a stone bench bore the carved initials AM 1832, and admired the repotted moon's embrace vines in the conservatory. Clara placed her hand upon the bench's smooth surface, whispering, "Here is where our ancestor walked long ago." Maud knelt to inspect a cluster of blooms. "And here is where her memory lives on, through us." She smiled at Clara, and the two sisters stood, linked by newfound heritage. Meanwhile, Poirot and Hastings strolled along the terrace, the detective's eyes distant. "Hastings," he observed, "though this case began with sabotage and secrecy, it ends in restoration. The Marwood line is stronger for its trials." Hastings grinned. "And thanks to you, mon ami. Without your persistence, the codicil and two new heirs might have remained forever hidden." Poirot placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "The truth is like a knight on its square, always poised to protect what is just. Now, the Marwoods can move forward with clarity and compassion." As the sisters rejoined them, their laughter drifting on the breeze, Poirot felt the final threads of the mystery weave into a tapestry of hope. Marwood Manor stood proud in the autumn light, a house healed, a family reunited, and a legacy secured, at last. And in the distance, the ivory knight gleamed softly on the library shelf, sentinel of a secret that had found its perfect conclusion. Chapter 13. Tokens of Remembrance. That evening, after the autumn sun had dipped behind the oaks, Marwood Manor settled into a soft hush. In the great hall, a final lantern burned low by the hearth, its amber glow reflecting upon polished marble floors. Lady Viola, Charles, Clara, and Maud sat in a close circle, their laughter gentle as they shared memories of the day's discoveries. Mrs. Pemberton moved quietly among them, replenishing tea and small cakes, while Mr. Jacobs tended the fire with thoughtful care. Hastings found Poirot standing before the hearth, ivory knight in hand, as he allowed his eyes to roam the rooms. Familiar corners. Mon ami, Hastings murmured. The family seems at peace at last. Poirot inhaled the mingled scents of wood smoke and tea. Yes, Hastings, the threads of justice and compassion have woven a new pattern here. He placed the knight upon the mantelpiece among ancestral busts, and see how it stands guard over Marwood's future. The sisters rose and approached Poirot in unspoken gratitude. Clara spoke first. Monsieur Poirot, you have given us more than inheritance. You have given us belonging. She offered him a pressed bouquet of late roses. He accepted it with grace. Madame, it is my greatest pleasure to see a family restored. Maud added, Please, remain for supper. Share our last evening at the manor. Poirot hesitated, then smiled wryly. Alas, I must prepare for my departure at dawn, yet I shall dine with you this once. In the candle-lit dining room, the 5 Marwoods sat together, joined by Poirot and Hastings. Conversation flowed lightly. Plans for estate improvements, the sisters' upcoming studies in horticulture, and Charles's ambition to catalogue the newly uncovered archives. Outside, a gentle wind stirred the vines that framed the windows. Between courses, Poirot leaned toward Lady Viola. Madame, you spoke of transparency in your trust. Will you consider inviting the Bellamy sisters to serve as trustees? Viola nodded. Absolutely. Their perspectives will enrich our decisions and honour Anne's memory. Charles added, I concur. A family governed by many voices is a family strengthened. When the final port was poured, Mrs. Pemberton and Mr. Jacobs entered with steaming bowls of apple compote. The housekeeper paused, eyes misting. May this sweetness be emblematic of your lives ahead. Poirot raised his glass. To Marwood, past, present, and future. Glasses chimed softly. In that moment, the manor's stone walls seemed to exhale relief, as though centuries of hidden strife had finally found resolution. Later, in the library, Poirot and Hastings packed their trunks. The sisters clustered by the doorway, silent farewells warming the chill of night air. Maud pressed Poirot's gloves into his hands. Keep these, she said, smiling. May they guide you through every mystery. He tucked them into his coat pocket. Clara laid a folded scrap of parchment atop his trunk. Open when you next need courage, she whispered. Poirot bowed and touched the brim of his hat. Mesdemoiselles, you have given me much more than tokens. You have reminded me of the power of family. As they descended the oak staircase, Hastings paused in the hall. The ivory knight glimmered on the mantel, silent witness to the manor's renewal. He turned to Poirot. "What will you do with the parchment?" Poirot smiled enigmatically. "Ah, but that is a jest between friends." He clapped Hastings's shoulder. "Come, mon ami, a new dawn awaits." Outside, the carriage awaited beneath a sky thick with stars. Poirot took one last look at the ivy-clad facade before stepping aboard, his silhouette framed by the lantern light. As the horses trotted into the night, the manor's windows glowed softly behind them, testament to the healing that truth, guided by compassion, can bring. And in that glow, Poirot felt the quiet promise of tomorrow's enigmas, waiting patiently to be unveiled. Chapter 14. The Parchment's Revelation. Late that night, aboard the rattling carriage bound for London, Hercule Poirot sat in thoughtful silence, the folded scrap of parchment resting in his palm. The countryside had faded into inky darkness, punctuated by the warm glow of distant inns. Captain Hastings slept in the corner seat, his head against the window, unaware that another mystery waited in the small paper bundle. Poirot smoothed the creases and unfolded the parchment under the carriage's dim lantern. The paper was brittle, its edges singed, and upon it were written 4 lines in delicate copperplate. "Beneath the moon where shadows dance, a silent night guards time's expanse. Seek the rose that blooms at night, and truth shall wake within its light." Poirot's keen eyes absorbed every word. He refolded the parchment and tucked it into his waistcoat pocket. "Curieux," he murmured, "a riddle in verse, an invitation to pursue yet another secret." He glanced at the sleeping Hastings. "Mon ami, it seems our work is not done." Morning found them at Whitehaven Mansions, piqued by restlessness. After a brief repast of tea and toast, Poirot summoned Hastings into his study. "Hastings, this parchment. It arrived unaccompanied, yet its handwriting is the same as the codicil's memorandum. Someone at Marwood Manor left it intentionally." Hastings stretched and yawned. "So the manor still holds secrets, even after all we've uncovered?" "Precisely," Poirot said, tapping his moustaches. "Observe the verse. Beneath the moon where shadows dance. The moon's embrace vine blooms only at midnight beneath the glass roof of the conservatory." He fetched his notebook. "And a silent night guards time's expanse. That must refer to the ivory chess. Night. It guarded the codicil's date concealed within its carvings." Hastings nodded. Then the next line. "Seek the rose that blooms at night." He paused, frowning. "Roses don't bloom at night, do they?" "Not ordinarily," Poirot replied. "But legend holds that the night-blooming Rosa Noctis, a rare hybrid, pushes its petals open under a full moon. Marwood's rose garden contains an experimental bed where Lady Viola cultivates exotic varieties." He rose and fetched his coat. "Come, Hastings. We shall return to Marwood Manor and consult Lady Viola. I suspect a hidden letter or artifact awaits beneath." The petals of the Noctis rose. That evening, the carriage rolled silently across the frost-kissed drive of Marwood Manor. The windows gleamed with lamplight, and a pale moon hovered overhead. At the entrance, Lady Viola greeted them, her expression alight with curiosity. "Monsieur, Poirot, Captain Hastings, how fortuitous your return!" She clasped Poirot's gloved hand. Did you think of something new?" Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, this parchment suggests the conservatory holds a final secret to restore your family's legacy." He showed her the verse. Lady Viola's brows rose. "The night blooming Rosa Noctis. I recall harvesting its first bud only last night. I can show you the greenhouse. In the conservatory, the moon's embrace vines stood aside to reveal an iron trellis adorned with slender stems. At its centre, under the glass dome, bloomed the Noctis rose, a pale blossom unfurled in spectral beauty. Its petals shimmered, silver in the moonlight. Poirot approached reverently, finger extended. "See here," he said, parting the petals gently. Beneath lay a small lead box, its lid secured by a clasp shaped like a chess knight. Hastings produced a pocket-knife and lifted the lid. Inside lay a folded vellum, tied with a crimson ribbon, and a second miniature ivory knight no larger than a thimble. Lady Viola gasped. What could this be? Poirot untied the ribbon and unfolded the vellum. On it was inscribed the original signature of Algernon Marwood, dating 1832, and a brief codicil in his own hand. "To my daughter Anne and her progeny, should the main line falter, this document grants you stewardship of Greycroft Manor. Keep this safe until the true heirs stand revealed." Poirot turned to Lady Viola. "This codicil predates the one discovered in Passmore and Gray's archives. It confirms Anne's descendants were destined to inherit additional lands, ensuring the continuity of both Greycroft and Marwood estates." Lady Viola's eyes shone with tears. "My aunt left this for us. She anticipated betrayal, yet placed her trust in hidden symbols." Hastings lifted the thimble-sized knight. "And here is the silent knight, the final guardian." Poirot smiled. "A treasure, hidden in verse, in petals and in ivory, accessible only to those who knew where to seek." He handed the vellum to Lady Viola. "Your family's legacy now stands fully restored." Lady Viola turned to Hastings. "Please, Captain, assist me in safeguarding this document within the Manor's archives. It shall be recorded alongside the other codicils." Hastings bowed. "At once, Lady Viola." Poirot placed his hand on the glass canopy. "And so, mon ami, another mystery comes to light. Proof that in every noble house secrets sleep until the curious awaken them. Tonight, Marwood stands replete, its past reconciled with its future." As they departed the conservatory, the night-blooming Rosa Noctis closed its petals, its duty fulfilled. Outside, the moon continued its silent vigil, casting long shadows that whispered of mysteries yet to come. And with that, Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings set forth into the night, hearts aglow with the triumph of truth. Chapter 15. Guardians of the legacy in the pale light of dawn, Marwood Manor stirred with renewed purpose. Lady Viola moved through the corridors, carrying the vellum codicil's fragile pages to the library's new trust archive. Charles followed close behind, cradling a stack of ledgers and legal briefs. Together, they paused before a carved oak cabinet, its doors freshly varnished and inlaid with the Marwood crest. "Here," Lady Viola whispered, easing the codicil onto a shelf beside its predecessors. "Your mother's final testament finds its rightful place." She closed the doors with reverent care. Charles nodded. No more secrets, only truth. He turned to his sister. This completes the circle. The Bellamy sisters will join us soon as co-trustees. Across the landing, in the conservatory, Clara and Maud Bellamy oversaw the repotting of the night-blooming Rosa Noctis into a marble planter inscribed Anne Marwood, 1832. The two sisters worked in harmony, their hands gentle on the delicate stems. Clara remarked, "It blooms once a year, but its memory endures each night." Maud smiled. A fitting emblem for our family's past, fragile yet resilient. At the same moment, in the sunlit drawing-room, Mrs. Pemberton and Mr. Jacobs stood beside Mrs. Ward, the vicar's wife. Together, they reviewed plans for the village infirmary and school, where both would offer their service. Mrs. Pemberton, clasping her hands, said softly, "I once believed mercy was weakness. Now I see it is the greatest strength." Mr. Jacobs bowed his head. "And I shall protect this house with loyalty tempered by wisdom." From the library doorway, Poirot and Hastings observed the scene. Poirot adjusted his coat and smiled. "See how justice unfolds into reconciliation, Hastings. Each heart here has been tested and tempered like steel." Hastings surveyed the family at work. It's more than restored legacy. It's renewed purpose. Lady Viola appeared, holding 2 hand-blown crystal glasses filled with freshly pressed apple juice. "Monsieur, join us," she invited, offering one to Poirot. "Your insight has given us this new beginning." Poirot accepted. The glass. "Madame, the pleasure is mine. To see Marwood's spirit revived is reward beyond measure." They drank, the juice tart on their tongues. Charles raised his glass. "To unity." Clara and Maud echoed the toast. Even Mrs. Pemberton and Mr. Jacobs raised theirs with humble grace. Later, in the East Wing's guest suite, Poirot and Hastings prepared to depart. Hastings tucked the crimson ribbon and thimble knight into his waistcoat, while Poirot replaced his gloves into their velvet case. A gentle knock sounded at the door. Lady Viola entered with a small parcel wrapped in silk ribbon. "Last gift," she said. "My mother's pendant, engraved with always the night. May it keep you safe." Poirot unwrapped the gift. A silver locket depicting a chess knight in profile, its eye set with a single garnet. He held it before the light, then placed it over his heart. "Merci, madame. I shall wear it with honour." With farewells exchanged, the carriage awaited. As the horses set off, the manor receded behind them, its towers crowned by early sunlight. Hastings leaned forward. "Do you think this truly closes the case?" he asked. Poirot gazed back at the ivy-clad facade. "Perhaps, but a detective knows that endings are but prologues in disguise. We have safeguarded the Marwood legacy, yet every house harbours new whispers." He touched the locket through his coat. "This pendant reminds me. Vigilance is the truest safeguard." On the road to London they spoke little, each immersed in reflection. Hastings considered Poirot's words, then ventured, "Shall we return to the archives at Passmore and Grey? Perhaps there are other overlooked codicils in those dusty volumes." Poirot's small smile broadened. "An excellent suggestion, Hastings. The past always holds more than one secret." He leaned back, closing his eyes as the carriage swayed. In his mind, the map of Marwood Manor's mysteries, the clock, the ledger, the rose, sparkled like constellations, each point now connected by the lines of truth. When they reached the city, Poirot stepped onto the cobblestones, adjusting his hat. He glanced at Hastings. "Mon ami, the game continues. Let us attend to the next case with the same precision and compassion we brought." "Here," Hastings grinned, "always at your service, Poirot." And so, beneath the bustling streets of London, Hercule Poirot ventured onward, ever mobile, ever alert, a silent knight moving with integrity across the vast chessboard of human intrigue. Chapter 16. Whispers in the Archives. Rain drizzled against the tall mullioned windows of Passmore and Gray's archival room as Poirot and Hastings arrived the following morning. The brass plaque above the door caught a lone drop of water, and Hastings pulled his umbrella closed with a sigh. "It seems even London's skies conspire to keep us indoors," he remarked. Poirot smiled indulgently. "Perfect conditions for delving into dusty tomes, mon ami. The past reveals its secrets most readily when the present is washed clean." He led Hastings through rows of towering shelves, each lined with leather-bound ledgers and bundles of correspondence. Mr. Passmore, looking more composed than the last time they met, greeted them at a polished oak desk. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, thank you for returning. You mentioned further codicils might lie hidden here?" "Indeed," Poirot replied, removing his gloves and placing them neatly in his coat pocket. "The map of Marwood's legacy is richer than any single document. We seek any references to Anne Kirkwood's line or ancillary bequests omitted from the principal ledgers." Passmore gestured toward a narrow alcove. "These volumes were misfiled decades ago, during my father's tenure. Very few know of them." He retrieved a folio labelled Miscellaneous Wills and Codicils, 1800-1900, and handed it to Poirot. Poirot opened the volume with reverence, thumbing through brittle pages until he found a penciled annotation. "See, folio 182. He turned to the indicated folio and read sotto voce. "Item, in the event of no male Marwood issue beyond the third generation, the lands of Windersglen to pass to heirs of the Kirkwood line, subject to annual allotment for local educational trust." Hastings' eyebrows shot up. "Windersglen? That was a subsidiary estate sold off 50 years ago." "Precisely," Poirot said, eyes alight. "But here is the true surprise, the educational trust provision. Amy's descendants were not only granted property, but also entrusted with the welfare of the village school in Harlingford." He closed the folio thoughtfully, a final echo of her devotion. He turned to Passmore. "I trust you will see that this codicil is recorded with the same care as those for Greycroft and Marwood Manor." Passmore inclined his head. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. I shall arrange to restore Windersglen to the Kirkwood, now Bellamy estate, and establish the educational trust as specified." Poirot stood, gathering the folio into his arms. "Excellent. And now, Captain Hastings, let us tour the rest of these misfiled volumes. There may yet be more whisperings of Anne's quiet philanthropy." As they moved along the alcove, Poirot paused before another thin ledger, its spine cracked with age. He opened it to a page cramped with annotations in two hands. Hastings peered over his shoulder as Poirot's finger followed the lines. Note: Anne Marwood's jewels, pearls and garnets, entrusted to custodian Eliza Pemberton, to be returned to heirs upon first gathering of Bellamy descendants. Hastings whistled softly. So the sisters may claim family heirlooms in addition to land. May we? Poirot smiled. A delicate balance of material and moral inheritance. He jotted a note in his little book. We must inform Lady Viola and the Bellamys at once. These jewels were never mentioned. They continued their exploration. The afternoon light waned. At last, Poirot closed the final folio with satisfaction. We have completed our survey, mon ami. 3 codicils, the original bequest to Anne, the Greycroft Amendment, and now Windersglen with its charitable trust, and the jewels. The Marwood legacy is whole. Hastings stretched and yawned. A tidy conclusion, wouldn't you say? Poirot gathered the documents and folios. For this chapter, yes. But remember, Hastings, that history's pages always hold room for discovery. He smiled at Passmore. You have much work ahead to formalize these bequests. Passmore bowed. And I am grateful for your guidance, monsieur. Marwood and Bellamy heirs alike will thank you. Poirot lifted his hat. It has been my honour. May these long-hidden codicils serve the living as they served the departed. As rain pattered on, the windows, Poirot and Hastings stepped back into the London streets. The weight of centuries now balanced at last upon Marwood's archives, and in their hearts the detective and his friend knew that though one mystery had closed, the world remained ever ready to reveal its next secret. Chapter 17. The Bellamy Pilgrimage. A week later, the crisp autumn air carried the scent of burned leaves as Clara and Maud Bellamy arrived once more in Devonshire. This time not as seekers, but as guardians of Anne Marwood's far-flung bequests. They had journeyed ahead of Poirot and Hastings to oversee the restoration of Windersglen and the establishment of the Harlingford Educational Trust. The sisters alighted at the quaint station, their breath forming little clouds in the cool dawn, light, and were greeted by Mrs. Ward, the vicar's wife, and a deputation of local school children clutching freshly printed copies of the Trust's charter. Clara's eyes filled with tears at the sight. They know of our family's legacy, she whispered to Maud. I never imagined the impact would be so immediate. Maud smiled, handing each child a gilded bookmark embossed with Anne Marwood Educational Trust, 1832-2025. The children's cheers echoed along the platform, mingling with the hiss of the departing train. It was, both sisters agreed, the most fitting testament to their great-great-aunt's vision. Moments later, Poirot and Hastings stepped from the carriage, their arrival met by Mrs. Ward's gracious curtsy and the soft strains of a schoolmistress's fiddle. Poirot doffed his hat, moustaches quivering. "Mademoiselle, what a splendid welcome!" he exclaimed. Clara and Maud embraced him warmly, then turned to Hastings, offering him the first official copy of the Trust's charter. He accepted it with a grin. A distinguished honour indeed. They processed through Harlingford village, where banners, bearing the Marwood crest, fluttered from lamp-posts and wreaths of late roses framed the schoolhouse door. Inside, the modest schoolroom had been polished and prepared for a formal ceremony. Rows of desks gleamed, and on the teacher's desk lay 4 small velvet pouches, each containing a string of pearls and a garnet brooch, Anne Marwood's jewels rescued from the misfiled ledger. The sisters exchanged a look of joy and disbelief at these tokens of their ancestors' affection. Lady Viola, having arrived with Lord Edmund, stood at the head of the room. She raised her hand for silence. "Today," she began, voice reverberating through the hush, "we witness the fulfilment of Anne Marwood's generous spirit. Clara and Maud Bellamy, by right of blood, bring not only these jewels, but also the promise of education for Harlingford's children, secured by our shared trust." She gestured toward the pouches. "These heirlooms, long hidden, now symbolize the unity of our families and the power of generosity." Amid applause, Clara and Maud kneeled to accept the brooches, fastening one upon each of their coats as a sign of solemn dedication. Poirot watched from the back, his heart warmed by the scene. After the children sang an anthem composed in Anne's honour, he approached Mrs. Ward and the schoolmistress. "Madame, your devotion to this school has been exemplary. With the trust now funded, how shall you use the annual allotment?" The aged schoolmistress, a gentlewoman with kind eyes, replied, "We shall expand our library, provide midday meals for those in need, and offer evening classes for adult learners. Anne Marwood's vision will live in every page read and every mind inspired." Hastings, standing beside Poirot, added, "And the village itself will flourish. New apprenticeships, better livelihoods, a home for those who might otherwise wander." Poirot placed a reassuring hand on Hastings's arm. "Thus justice ripples outward, mon ami, transforming not only land but lives." As the ceremony concluded and the villagers bid farewell, the Bellamy sisters led the way back to Vindersglen Manor, a modest but stately house overlooking rolling fields. Clara unlocked the front door and paused. "Shall we?" she asked, and together they entered a hall where paintings of Anne Marwood gazed benevolently upon them. Maud placed the garnet brooch into a glass case beside Anne's portrait. "Now, she watches over all," Maud murmured. Clara nodded, tears shining. Her legacy is complete. In the fading light, Poirot and Hastings stood upon the manor steps. Hastings looked up at the gentle slopes of the Devon hills. "A fine conclusion?" he asked. Poirot's eyes reflected the amber sky. "A fitting symphony, Hastings. A melody begun nearly 2 centuries ago, and brought to harmonious close by courage, compassion, and the careful sleuthing of one little grey cell." He tapped his cane once, then again. "Yet remember, the world's mysteries are infinite. Farewell to Windersglen for now, but the next enigma awaits beyond the mist." As dusk settled, the 2 friends departed down the winding lane, their silhouettes melting into twilight. Silent knights once more on the eternal chessboard of human affairs, ready to honour whatever hidden truths lay ahead. Chapter 18. Legacy Fulfilled and Horizons. Anew, a soft mist drifted across the rolling lawns of Marwood Manor as dawn's first light brushed the horizon. The great house, now fully restored to its former grandeur and more beloved than ever, emanated a sense of calm purpose. Within its oak-panelled walls, preparations were underway for the final ceremony of the Bellamy sisters' integration into the Marwood legacy, and the formal farewell to Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings. In the library, lanterns cast a warm glow over the assembled family and staff. Lord Edmund stood beside Lady Viola, each clutching a programme printed in crimson and gold. Clara and Maud Bellamy, resplendent in gowns of deep emerald to honour the night-blooming Rosa Noctis, took their places beside Charles. Mrs. Pemberton and Mr. Jacobs, now reconciled and redeemed through service, stood humbly at the rear, their expressions a blend of pride and contrition. Emily, the maid whose keen eyes first observed subtle clues, held a bouquet of fresh roses. Poirot entered last, his cane tapping softly on the marble floor, followed by Hastings. The detective's gaze swept across the assembled faces, each reflecting gratitude, hope, and the promise of future harmony. He paused before the hearth, adjusting his grey waistcoat. Hastings took his place at Poirot's side, offering a reassuring nod. Lord Edmund lifted his voice, steady yet emotional. "Dear friends and family, today we celebrate not only the resolution of past wrongs, but also the promise of a united future. Through Hercule Poirot's brilliance and Captain Hastings's steadfast support, we have uncovered hidden truths, restored rightful heirs, and reaffirmed bonds that transcend time." A ripple of applause met his words. Poirot inclined his head, modestly, moustaches quivering. Lady Viola stepped forward. "On behalf of the Marwood and Bellamy families, I offer our deepest thanks. To Monsieur Poirot, whose little grey cells have guided us through labyrinths of secrecy, and to Captain Hastings, whose loyalty and courage have been our steadfast companion." Clara Bellamy took a small ivory knight, the very first gift Poirot received, and placed it upon the central table. "This knight has journeyed with us through every twist of fate. Let it remain here in the heart of Marwood Manor, a testament to vigilance and integrity." Maud added, "May future generations look upon it and remember that every secret, however well concealed, can be brought into the light." As the guests fell silent, Poirot spoke, voice warm and clear. "Mes amis, while it falls to me to accept your gratitude, the true achievement belongs to you all. This house could have become a mausoleum of bitterness and regret. Instead, you chose mercy, courage, and unity. In the grand game of life, the noblest moves are those that restore what was broken." Hastings stepped forward, handing Lady Viola a leather-bound volume, and as a small token, he said with a grin, "We present this compendium of Marwood and Bellamy family histories, annotated and corrected. May it guide future custodians faithfully." A murmur of appreciation swept through the assembly. Mrs. Pemberton approached, offering Poirot a pressed posy of night-blooming roses, their fragrance sweet and evocative. "For you, monsieur, as a reminder that even the rarest blossoms can thrive in the right hands." Poirot accepted with genuine emotion, tucking the flowers into his lapel. Outside, the carriage awaited beneath the ancient portico. First, Clara and Maud embraced Poirot and Hastings. "Your wisdom has given us new roots," Clara whispered. Maud pressed a small leather talisman into Hastings's hand. "So, you need never forget the nights you lit our path." Charles and Lady Viola stood together to bid farewell. "Come again, our friends," Charles said, offering his arm to Hastings. "The manor's doors are forever open." Lady Viola extended a lace handkerchief to Poirot. "And may fortune favour you in all your adventures." As the carriage rolled away, Poirot rolled away. Poirot gazed back at the ivy-clad facade, now alive with figures standing at windows and waving. The morning mist parted to reveal the rose garden in full bloom, the noctis roses unfurling their petals in silent celebration. Hastings nudged Poirot gently. "Well, mon ami, is this truly the end?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The end of this chapter, dear Hastings. But a detective knows. The world abounds with riddles yet unsolved, hearts yearning for closure, and mysteries that demand gentle illumination." He tapped his cane, drawing a faint echo in the crisp air. "Marwood's legacy stands secure. Now, let us turn our sights towards the next enigma, beckoning beyond the horizon." And so, with the rising sun as witness, Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings embarked once more on the winding road of inquiry. Ever vigilant, ever compassionate, their story entwined with those they guided toward truth and reconciliation. In the grand tapestry of human affairs, each case closed opened the door to countless possibilities, and they marched forward, silent knights on the chessboard of life, ready to enlighten where shadows linger still.